Hey guys, so of course we just had YCS Vegas recently, so as usual I wanted to provide an overview of the most played hand traps and staples among the topping deck lists that were publicly available. And before I continue, definitely a big thanks to my sponsors. Links and discount codes in the description below for Yu-Gi-Oh singles as well as supplies. Also want to shout out YGOProduct.com and Renren because I am using that as a data source for all the topping deck lists. As part of this video, I also know Ivan has his own thing in terms of hand traps and staples, so you can definitely go check that out as well. I'll have all the links down below. So another shout out to Lampy YGO as well for the graphic. This is what the top 16 look like for Team YCS Vegas. Because it's a 3v3, technically there were of course 48 deck lists. And so in terms of the deck lists that were available for this video, there were 34 of the 48. And so for the most part, it kind of looks mostly the same in terms of representation. Now in terms of an overview of the hand traps, we have a median number of 14 hand traps in the main deck. So this is honestly insane. So to put it into perspective, when I first started doing these kind of analysis around 2020, usually it was around 6. Okay, since then in the most recent year it's been more so around 9, which has kind of been the norm. But now the only time, if I recall, that we hit 10 plus cards in the main as a median number was a couple years ago during YCS Charlotte. If you recall, this is when the 60 card deck lists were very popular with the adventure token package as well as DP through Verde Anaconda. So because it was 60 cards, of course they were just playing an absolute a larger number of hand traps. But if you looked at the proportion of hand traps relative to the deck size, then of course right now this is certainly something that we haven't really seen up until now. So it's a really high number, and even in the side it's also gone up compared to the just even a couple of weeks ago when I did this kind of breakdown with the regional topping list and median number of 6.5 in the side. And in terms of the board breakers, you have to make compromises somewhere if you're playing that many hand traps, so you are seeing a decline in the number of board breakers in the main at 1 as a median number, and in the side it was a median number of 4, which was about 5 just a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so let's just cover the most played hand traps as usual, and we are starting with Ash Blossom. This was actually seen in all of the deck lists that were at least publicly available. So I know, leading into this format, some people were thinking maybe Ash doesn't see that much play because it does allow your opponent to combo through, let's say, going into Hida and special summoning out your Ash. But, clearly not. It's still pretty generic. It's still applicable to every deck, and I guess still worthy enough that they are all playing it. And then you also have Nibiru. This is another card that I think, when it comes to Nibiru versus Droll, if you had to choose one, I was kind of seeing how people were saying, you should probably prioritize Nib in terms of like the Fire King Snake Eye matchup. But nonetheless, of course, Droll was also seeing a lot of play as well. So especially interesting that, it was actually a lot of lists main decking it if they were playing it. A lot of times, even when Droll is seeing a pretty decent amount of play from my recent breakdowns, or rather in the past, it still was more of a side deck card for the most part, if I recall. And so, you know what, you do still have to respect Roll even in like game 1 situations. In Perm, as well as effect negation cards like Effect Failure, it was of course very, very popular during the Rescue Ace, tier 1 format, but now I think it's actually it had slightly fallen off when I first did this a couple of weeks ago post Phantom Nightmare, but now it's starting to come back, I guess. Someone certainly let me know in the comments if there's any particular reason for that. I mean, from my understanding, I guess against Fire King Snake Eye, you would want to Imperm, Veiler, something like, Snake Eye Ash, or maybe Promethean Princess. So certainly let me know in the comments if anything's kind of changed where this has been considered as really, really impactful. And then we also have Ghost Spell. It's still seeing a decent amount of play. I think it was better though before Phantom Nightmare in terms of the Fire King matchup, just because I do think that they have ways to kind of chain block against Bell. And also you're not seeing Labrynth much at all anymore, even with something like Transaction Rollback. Really has not done too well. So Bell, still there, but not nearly as high. And as I mentioned earlier, these effect negation cards like Ghost Mourner start to see return and play again very quickly after it initially dropped off. And then you have Bestials, which are sided. This one's particularly interesting because in the deck list that were included for this video, we actually did not have any Dragon Link. So these are actually decks, or even branded, really. So these are actually decks where, they are not playing any kind of Bestials as a main deck package, but they're actually just siding this. I guess you can use it for something like, I don't know, IP in the graveyard, or maybe even Link Removal. I'm not too sure. And then you have some time cards, Dogwood. This does come back and forth again here and there. It is really, really strong card in the time situation. And you also had Frame Delta, as well as also Gamma in 6 list. So this one's kind of cool because, so this is basically like Gamma, except but for spell cards. From what my friend tells me, Adam, thanks again, it's mainly for, I guess, let's say original Sinful. It's kind of like ashing it, but instead, your opponent doesn't get the ash to summon off of Hida. So I think it's a pretty interesting application. And then let's just move on to the most common side deck staples. We are starting with talents. Of course, as mentioned, we have a ton of hand traps in the format right now, and you are going to have to play talents, either play through it or maybe you play through it anyways, most likely, and you get to punish your opponent extra hard for hand trapping you. And then speaking of hand traps, we also have cross out. So this one's particularly good right now, especially when there's so many mirrors, because we're in a essentially tier 0 format. So it really has a lot of application. A lot of people made it, a lot of people side it. I think it's actually worthwhile. Of course, you also have Summon Limit. This is a card that, is very, very strong floodgate and very popular choice against Fire Kings right now. Perhaps, Konami did recently finally hit some floodgates to one, like Rivalry. There can be only one. Something that, I was actually quite frankly surprised that they actually did it finally. But Summon Limit could potentially be up there. I think the last time we really saw a call for Summon Limit to be hit was very brief. It was during the remote YCS days a few years ago. Like Subterra Dragoon was actually doing pretty well in like a remote YCS, and Summon Limit at that point, I know some people were making that call. You also have Cosmic, still pretty strong against, let's say, Fire King, the field spell, or even anything in like the spell trap zone, thanks to like the Snake Eye stuff, can be pretty useful there, even against something like, I guess, like Voiceless Voice, that getting rid of their continuous spell is also pretty nice as well. And Call by the Grave, we have a lot of hand traps, but on top of that, just being able to negate whatever is in your opponent's grave, kind of comes up a lot when your opponent's playing Fire King / Snake Eye. And then we have Lullaby of Obedience. This one certainly was not on my bingo card for this kind of video, but I think it was really cool, especially the fact that most decks were actually main decking it if they were playing it. And again, a big thanks to my friend Adam for giving me the inside scoop on how this really works. For those of you not familiar, you pay 2,000 life points, you call a card, a monster in fact, and your opponent can either give it to the opponent's hand or special summon it to the opponent's field. So let's say you call something like Ash Blossom, then either you give your opponent the Ash or you special it, in which case they can like link away, and because Ash would go to the owner's graveyard, you can heat it and combo through. Or let's say under a situation like Droll, you call something like Witch, which in case you cannot add it to the opponent's hand, so then they are forced to special summon it and kind of combo through that way. So I think that's really cool, and that they were able to make use of an old card like this. And again, thanks to Adam for helping me out with this card. Next we have Feather Duster. Really surprising to see this this low this time around. Certainly not used to seeing that. You have something like Droplets, which is still seeing a little bit of play, not much for a 34, not a lot. You have Anti-Spell, which is honestly was kind of popular actually the last time I did this, but you know what, it's still a floodgate. I hope they hit at some point. Typhoon, as well as there's some other cards like Soul Release, Lightning Storm, Change of Heart, that was also played in 3 lists. Typhoon is an interesting one. For those of you not familiar, it's a normal trap card. It can destroy a face-up spell or trap, and if your opponent controls, I guess, like 2 spell traps, you can actually activate from the hand. And at a first glance, that might seem like really bad, and why not play Cosmic? Why not play Twin Twister? But the thing is, because it is a trap, let's say your opponent goes first, you can actually still play this from your hand, right? Because it's a trap, which essentially means, you actually have a way to destroy your opponent's spell trap before your turn even rolls around, which is a little bit unique, right? The last time I saw this play even remotely was, I believe, 2019. It was when Pendulum Magicians were kind of like in between tier 1, tier 2, depending on who you ask. And because they would have like face-up scales, you could actually Typhoon and like get rid of one of their scales. But that was like the only time I've ever seen this card really see at least a decent amount of play. So I think it's kind of cool that this kind of returned for this time around. In terms of most common generic extra deck monsters, SP was in 100% of the deck list, at least that were publicly available. So that is, of course, kind of discouraging to see for, I'm sure, a lot of you who don't really want to pay out for SP, which I understand. Link Karibo, I didn't add it last time, but I decided to continue to add it now as kind of a quote-unquote generic extra deck monster. Technically not really in this context, because it's really just for Fire King, but it's also a contention for a potential ban, which I know sounds a little weird, but I know that's a lot what some of the players were calling for. And then you have something like Dark Appaloosa, of course, is very popular right now, and even Nightmare Phoenix, kind of pretty cool to see that. I mean, it's a fire, it's a link to, you're seeing it in Fire King, and being able to pop a spell trap is always useful, especially in a format with some floodgates like Summon Limit. And then finally, on to some tech choices. Deck Lockdown, I've featured this before, so it's certainly not anything new, but I think it is. I was seeing it in a couple of lists. I think what I always forget about this card is that not only can players not add cards from the deck, but they actually cannot special summon from the main deck either, which is incredibly strong. So next we have Ultimate Slayer, which, when the card was first announced, it had a lot of hype. It was actually pretty expensive on release as well, but it really didn't see that much play. Among the time that I've been doing these kind of top cut breakdowns, it's never made top top 5 at all. But nonetheless, you know, this card is typically seen in play in decks with a very flexible extra deck. So right now, that would be something like Voiceless Voice, in which case that was actually seen in 2 of those lists for this event. Floowandereeze can typically play this as well if they wanted to. So it's kind of a nice monster removal, but for the most part doesn't see that much play. And then finally, we also had like another super poly target. This isn't anything really new either, but it was only seen in a couple lists, Voiceless Voice to be specific. It does involve Cyberus monster plus a Link monster. So again, something like, you know, Fire King Snake Eye, if you can imagine, depending on like the stage of the game, like they do have a lot of Cyberus monsters, right? You have something like IP, like Link Kuriboh, even Sunlight Wolf, Raging Phoenix, as well as even Access Code Talker, like that's a Link, rather that's a Cyberus as well. You need another Link for that, but you know, super poly, especially in a deck like Voiceless Voice, where they do have a bit of a flexible extra deck. Like you can play a lot of different targets. Draco Exquisite was also seen some play in the topping deck list as well. Anyways, guys, that was it for the breakdown of the most played hand traps and staples from YCS Vegas. Hopefully that's helpful in terms of helping you prepare for whatever events coming up this weekend. For me, I do have the OTS Championship coming up, so I'm pretty excited about that, but I definitely need a lot more time to prepare for it. Anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons as always for the continued support, and well, take care, guys.